last Friday was August the 29th. Friday, August the 29th was the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Now, I lived in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit. We evacuated, feet and feet and feet and feet of flooding, total devastation and disaster. I think about that often. Inside of my dining room, I have a satellite image taken of the storm right before. It was 24 hours before it made landfall. And it takes up the whole body of water, what is formerly known, the artist formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Katrina coming in, and man, I think about that a lot. And my family, every August the 29th, we do a memorial. It's a culinary memorial, but we eat chicken and sausage gumbo, we eat jambalaya, we eat red beans and rice, crusty French bread. It just helps our family to connect and to remember something that really had a significant impact on us and our ministry and our future. And so that's what we do on August 29th. Do you remember where you were on 9/11? Yeah, like I don't even have to tell you the year, just like 9/11, everybody knows. Like that's memorialized in so many people's minds. I remember the classroom that I was in. I remember the TV, where it was in the room. I remember what the teacher was doing and how the students were reacting. Like I remember all of that. It's just ingrained and burned into my mind. 10 years later, I was in New York City and got the opportunity to go to where the Twin Towers were and to go by the museum and to relive that, think about it, process it, learn about it, the lives that were lost, the devastation. And there's a memorial there that you can go to. Really impactful for me. There are actually 31 national memorials in our country. Some of them are for presidents, like the Lincoln Memorial. Some of them are for historical figures, like Martin Luther King Jr. has a memorial in D.C. Some of them are signifying wars that were fought and won by our country, and other special events that happened in national parks and things that were set up. Memorials, man, are important. We actually do this for personal events as well. We do this in our family. Like my grandmother lives in Columbia, South Carolina. On her refrigerator, anytime she travels to a different state, she will buy a magnet. And Mom too, when I go to Mom two's house, I see, so I call my grandma Mom too, I see all of the states, all of the magnets, and you can point to any state and any magnet, and she'll tell you where she was and where they went and what they visited and where they ate and the sightseeing and like the whole journey behind it. And so she would buy those as a memorial, as a reminder of things that she's done and things that have happened in the past. There are apps that we have on our phones. Time Hop, I don't know if some of you might have Time Hop. The way that Time Hop works is any picture that you post on social media on that day will pop up on your phone on that day, years later. So like this week, we've been laughing at all of the pictures of our girls going back to school because Facebook has reminded us that our girls, this is what they look like on the first day of school in first grade and second grade and third grade and all the way up. So we see their cute outfits and their smiles and how much they've grown. It's like memorials. It's reminders of our girls and the sweet time that we've had with them. If we don't memorialize things in our lives, then we'll have significant moments in our lives and in history that will soon be memories that are forgotten in a fast-paced world. We're all about what's next and how do we get bigger and better and what's new, and very rarely do we take the time to stop and think and remember and memorialize things in our past. God would periodically instruct his people in the Bible to build memorials. He would specifically call them at points in their life to hit the pause button. Like, I know you got a lot going on. I know your future's bright. I know you got big plans and dreams and hopes. But like, just for a second, I just want you to hit the pause button. And he would force that on them and instruct them to do certain things, to build memorials or recognize memorials, to remember things. One particular story that I want to tell you about today is in the book of Joshua, back in the Old Testament. The people of Israel are getting ready to walk into the promised land. This is an idea that was birthed in the book of Genesis when Moses was born. God said that he was going to give his people a land of their own. They were slaves in Egypt, didn't have or own anything, and God's promise was a land, therefore the name Promised Land. Well, the bad news for them is it would take them 40 years to get from the place that God promised them to them actually stepping into it. So the end of Genesis, we got the book of Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus. All of the beginning of the Bible is this chronological journey that these people went through. And finally, in the book of Joshua, we see Joshua leading the people into the promised land. They got one more burden, one more hurdle to cross before they get there. Because in Joshua chapter 3, the people are standing with their toes at the edge of the Jordan River. And on the other side of the Jordan River is the promised land. Well, the problem is in Joshua chapter 3, it's the springtime. And to this day, the Jordan River can swell during the spring to be over 15 feet deep and 100 feet wide. So you can imagine how it would have been disheartening for hundreds of thousands of people carrying everything that they own, women, children, everything, and seeing the promised land on the other side of the river and thinking, how are we going to cross a 100-foot river that's over 15 feet deep in the middle? And in Joshua chapter 3, God does something crazy. He instructs the men that are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, right? Think Indiana Jones, like that episode. Like they're carrying that on the poles. And they tell the guys, the priests, the preachers, to walk out into the middle of the Jordan River, carrying the Ark of the Covenant and like hold it above your head and carry it into the river. And the Bible says that when the men began to carry the Ark of the Covenant into the Jordan River, then upstream the river stopped flowing. And so the further the men walked into the middle of the river, the lower the water went. Until eventually, when they got to the middle of the river was completely dry. Now, upstream, you could see where the Bible says that the water was walling, it was building. But God stopped the water so that his people could cross the Jordan River. And so, incredible story in Joshua chapter 3. And that's where we pick up every man, woman, and child in the nation crossed on dry land across this river, and they come to the other side, the promised land, after 40 years. And in Joshua chapter 4, we see what happens after that very last person crossed the river on dry land. It says, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from every tribe, and tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan River. Carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. The first thing that we see as a memorial is being built here in Joshua chapter 4. God commands them, and I want you to take stones that are in the middle of the river, and I want you to take them out, and I want you to take them to the edge of the river, and I want you to pile them up, like we're going to build a memorial. So tell your 12 guys, they're from the 12 different families in Israel, tell them that each one of them needs to get a stone and bring it out. And this story reminds me, is when God hit the pause button, when we stop, here's the first thing that I want to leave you with, challenge you with here this morning. When we stop to remember, it allows us to experience what God is doing. When we stop at a memorial, when we stop and remember things and take the moment to hit the pause button, it actually allows us to see what God is doing right here in our midst. Because you can imagine the people that were running across the river, 100,000 of them, all of a sudden running into the promised land. They are in their promised land. The thing they've been working for and dreaming for 40 years, they're finally there. It would have been so easy for them to just take off running, to claim a spot wherever their family wanted to be and to explore this promise that God had given. But before God allowed them to do that, he said, man, I want you to pause. Because if you're not careful, you'll totally miss the fact that God stopped a flowing river so that you could walk through it on dry ground. 15 feet of water used to be where the Ark of the Covenant is right now, but it's not now, it's dry. God did that. And if we're not careful, if God didn't say hit the pause button and I want you to take this in, then there's an option that God might be doing something in your life right now, but you're so focused on the future that you're totally missing it. God's moving and working and speaking and orchestrating things, changing people's lives, putting things in the right order, in the right perspective. But we can be so focused on what's next. And that's why oftentimes when God would say, hey, just hit the pause button. Look around you. Did you see what God just did? Do you see how God's moving and working in your life right now? God said, stop and turn around. I know the promised land's in front of you, but would you just take a second and turn around? Because there's a dried up river there. And there's a bunch of huge rocks in the river that no one's ever seen before because they've all been underwater. And I want you to pick one of those up because I never want you to forget what God did here. I want you to remember it, memorialize it. Sometimes in a breakneck speed world where we are obsessed with what's next, what's new, getting more, and looking towards the future, sometimes God calls us to pause and to look around at what he's doing right now in our midst and in our lives. So when we stop to remember, it allows us to experience not only what God is doing right in the moment, but number two, when we stop to remember, it connects us with all that God has done. All the many times that God has provided. Verse 4, this is what Joshua did. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel, and he told them, go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build the memorial. In the future, your children are going to ask you, what do these stones mean? And then you can tell them. They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. It's interesting, they got on the other side of the land, and the first thing that God told Joshua was, turn around. Now I want you to go back. Turn around and go back and get 12 stones. That was a symbol of the past. No, God, we've already crossed that bridge. We've already been through that season of our life. That's the past. We need to be focused on the future. See, I've learned this about God. Sometimes God will use what you've been through in the past to strengthen you for what he has for your future. We just need a reminder. We just can't blitz through it and forget God's faithfulness and forget what God has done. Man, I meet people today, I don't know if you fall into this category, but they'll read stories like this in the Bible and they're just convinced that God doesn't move like that anymore. God used to be really powerful and really obvious and really evident in the world today, but he's not. He doesn't do those things anymore. We just don't see things like this anymore. God doesn't move. Well, I just don't believe that. I believe that the reason why we don't notice it is because we are moving through life so quickly that God is working all around us, accomplishing things, but we don't take the opportunity to stop and look back and acknowledge what he's done. Acknowledge the times that he's provided, the times that he made a way, the time that he answered the prayer, the time where his presence was close when you needed him the most. And it's not that he didn't do it, it's just we've looked past it. We're gone. We've moved somewhere else. We've got our eyes and our heart set on other things. We fail to stop and remember what has happened around us and what God is doing, and that creates a disconnect for us with the power of God. We're just convinced God doesn't have any power anymore, and he doesn't use it. It's kind of like God hits the pause button in Joshua 4 and says, I want to show you the before and the after picture. I don't know if you've ever seen these shows where these people get these houses or apartments and they're dumps. They're complete dumps. They're ratty, messed up. Everything's old and no one would ever be interested in it. But they buy this house, and it seems like in the course of a weekend, they totally renovate and revamp this house, and it's a beautiful house. Now, if you just saw the end of the episode, you would just see a house that was newly renovated and decorated. It'd be just like if you went on the internet and looked up an estate page where you could see people's houses, real estate, houses for sale. I mean, every room is staged and it's a picture. And that's great. Like that looks like a newly renovated house. But what's amazing is when you look back at what the house was before they started. And pictures at the end that look just like a regular house, just a regular living room with new furniture in it. You look at the old picture and you're like, wait, that's what it was? There's no way. It makes it even more impressive to see the final product when you see how bad the original product was. And that's what God is doing. He says, man, you need to look back in your past and see where you've been. See how I've moved. See how your back was against the wall. Remember the times where your toes were on the Jordan and there was nowhere to go in front of you. There's just 100 feet of water, 15 foot deep, and God made a way. Look back and let that bolster your faith. When someone shows us what it used to be like, then the current setting, it just blows their mind. The end result is made even more powerful by stopping to see what you started with. What did you start with? What was your life like? How much has God done? How much has his hand moved? Remembering gives us faith for today, and it gives us courage for tomorrow. Looking back and remembering what was and comparing to what it is now makes you believe if God can change his life, if God can answer her prayer, if God can make a way for them, if God can show up and change their situation, then maybe he can do it in my life too. Looking back fuels our faith for the future. God's past faithfulness stokes our future faith in him. Last thing we remember from this story is when we stop to remember, it gives us confidence, not in what God is simply doing right now, not in what God has done, but stopping to remember and memorialize what God has done gives us faith for what God can do moving forward. Verse 8 and 9, here's how the story closes. So the men did as Joshua had commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River, one for each tribe, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the place where they camped for the night and constructed the memorial there. Joshua set up another pile of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. Joshua realized, I'm going to do something today that every time I pass by this memorial, I'm going to be reminded of God's past faithfulness, which is going to fuel the future for me. It's going to encourage me. It's going to boost my faith. I had these stones in my office, got two of these. I gave the staff a stone. This is like a stone that is from this story, not this real story, but like reminds me of this story, where water has rubbed this stone smooth. And I gave this to our staff. Maybe if you go into their office, there'll be a random stone in their office somewhere. And just challenge them, hey, we have to be people that remember God's past faithfulness. We have to be people that are willing to memorialize, to hit the pause button and actually reflect on what God has done, how he's moved in our lives, how he's provided, how he's always made a way. And stones like this, every time I look at it on the table in my office, I'm reminded of what God has done. It's a memorial. It's an altar that we can build. And just like these, but a little bit bigger is what they pulled out of the bottom of the Jordan River and stacked up on the shore. And every time they walked past that pile of stones, it would be a reminder of God's faithfulness. I've shown you this before. This red notebook is on the bookshelf in my office. I started this book in 2015, and I wrote on the front of it, Things Unseen. It's based on a verse out of Hebrews chapter 12. Faith is the belief in things that are yet to be seen. And so when you have faith, you believe things that haven't happened yet. And so I started to take in 2015 and just write different things in this book, things that I was asking the Lord for, things that hadn't happened yet, ways that I was asking him to provide, people's lives that I was praying that he would change. And every day I would just write in it and write different things. On August the 16th, 2015, I wrote on this page, I wrote at the top, God, you have provided for me countless times. And I just filled the page with different ways that God has provided, different prayers that he's answered, different doors that he's opened, different relationships that he's allowed, different connections that he put forward. Man, so many times, these are stones. I was drawing stones on a piece of paper. God, this is who you are. You're faithful. You're trustworthy. You've got a plan and you got a purpose. You always come through at the right time with the right answer. That was the memorial. Man, I read things. Some of y'all's names are in this book. Prayers that I've been praying for you. Things that you've shared with me that I'm asking God to move in a miraculous way. And I love going through this book. Man, when my faith feels like it's running on fumes, man, when it's running thin, I'll pull this book off the shelf, and what God has done in the past gets me excited and full of faith for what he can do in the future. In fact, the times in my life where I've been most faith-filled towards the future is coming off of a season where I've spent the most amount of time hitting the pause button and reflecting on God's faithfulness in the past. Because when you read things that haven't happened yet, and then years later God makes them happen, you start thinking that anything can happen, that God can do anything, that God can make anything happen, that God can open up any door, that God can heal any person, that God can mend any wound, that God hears every prayer, and in his timing and in his perfect way, it'll happen. And even though I can't see it yet, faith is belief in the things that are not yet seen. Sometimes God asks us to hit the pause button. The power of our past can fuel our faith in the future. So I want to ask you, what current situation are you in that you need to run through the filter of God's past faithfulness? Because I'd be willing to bet if you would hit the pause button and turn around and look back, then you would see how many times God provided, how many times his hand moved, how many times your back was against the wall and your feet were against the Jordan with nowhere else to go, and God made a way. And memorials and opportunities to remember God's faithfulness and God's provision and God's hand and God's care and God's love and the way that he brought you close when you needed it the most. That's why Joshua built the memorial. That's why God commanded people to build those memorials. Your fears will be quelled, your anxieties will be calmed, your struggles will be eased when we take a time to pause and not only acknowledge what God is doing right now, because he's working all around you, what God has done in the past, but then to start to believe for what God has not done yet, that we're still believing for, and putting our faith and our trust in him. As we took communion and this service came up today, I thought, man, the story of Joshua 4 is outlined. It's the memorial that we're celebrating today, because there's three things that we see in communion that Jesus was trying to accomplish. Number one, communion is a reminder of what God has done. Communion, number two, is a reminder of what God is doing right now. And communion is a promise for us of what God will do in the future in our lives. One of the most powerful faith enhancers is remembering all of the things that God has done in your life already. No wonder Jesus commanded when he pulled his disciples up to this table, he says, I want you to remember, do this in remembrance of me, because there's going to be some times where your mind and your heart are going to need to go back to this moment and remember who I am and remember what I did. Yep, because I died on Friday but rose on Sunday. And there's hope that can be found in Jesus. There's a life that can be found in Jesus. Sometimes our prayers are dominated by things like, God, show me more, do something more, prove it to me. And God simply looks back and says, you want a sign? You want to see faithfulness? Look around you. It's everywhere. My hand, the way I've worked, my provision. Turn around, friends. Look, isn't he good? Hasn't he always been? Doesn't he always show up? Doesn't he always piece it together for the benefit and the good of those that love and pursue him? Of course he has. We just haven't taken time to look at the memorials and remember who he is. Memorials are a huge faith builder. They're a reminder for us. During this next song, I want to invite you to the tables. We have tables in the balcony, 2 in the back, 1 here in the front. So whatever table is closest to you. I want to invite you, even as you stand up and approach the table, take the elements with you. And if you could, just take them back to your seat so that we can take them together. But just take a minute, even as you walk, even as you stand in line, and ask the Lord to help remind you of the times where he's been so good and so faithful. Because maybe there's something that he's calling you to next. But the first place you need to start is remembering how good he was to you in the previous season, how faithful and on time he's always been. And maybe that'll bolster your faith for whatever he's calling you to next. Would you stand with me? I'm going to pray and invite you to come up to the tables. God, thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for forcing us to hit the pause button, to stop, to not look ahead, to not be overwhelmed with what's next, but to simply look around and to acknowledge who you are and what you've done. God, I'm confident that if we do that, even right now in this moment, we'll be overwhelmed by your goodness, by your faithfulness, by your provision, by the times where you made a way where it seemed there was no other way. And so, God, I pray that as we take a moment to remember one of the most significant nights in human history, that you would use it not only for us as an opportunity to look backwards, but for our faith to be bolstered in the future, because I know you have a plan and a purpose for us moving forward. We're not done yet. So, Lord, help us to find the faith that we need now to continue to move forward in a relationship with you. Pray and ask those things in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.